All right. Hi, everyone. I think we're live now. So welcome to today's webcast. I'm super excited to be here. My name is Catherine. I am the communications director at NaNoWriMo, and I'm here today with some very awesome young folks that I'm excited to share this webcast with. This is part of a partnership that we are doing with the nonprofit Novelly, which has a mission to get ebooks by underrepresented youth published and taught in the classroom so that every student can feel seen and inspired by what they read in school. If you are joining today, also if you're writing for NaNoWriMo or if you're getting ready for Camp NaNoWriMo, which starts in April, which is a couple weeks away now, so very soon, you should make sure to create your Camp NaNoWriMo project on the NaNoWriMo website. And feel free to talk to us in the chat. Feel free to say hi, where you're watching from today, what you're working on with your writing. And yeah, with that, I think I'm going to hand it over to our hosts.
Hello, and also for those of you who don't know, NaNoWriMo is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that provides tools, structure, community, and encouragement to help people find their voices, achieve creative goals, and build new worlds on and off the page.
And as Catherine said earlier, Novelly is on a mission to get ebooks by underrepresented youth published and taught in the English classroom so that every student can feel seen and inspired by what they read in school. I'm Maddie. I'm one of your hosts for today's webcast. I'm an 11th grader and I live in Los Angeles, California.
I'm Emdya. I'm also a podcast co-host and also the host for today. I'm also an 11th grader. I live in Miami and my pronouns are she, her.
My name is Alyssa. I'm currently studying in Greenville, South Carolina as a public health and English major here at Furman University. And I use she, her pronouns.
Hey everyone, I'm Charlotte Young. I'm a sophomore at Purdue University studying political science and the U.S. Midwest Youth Poet Ambassador and finalist for the National Youth Poet Laureate title.
Hi everyone, my name is David Chen. I'm currently a high school senior at Phillips Exeter Academy, but next year I will go to college and study comparative literature and applied math.
Hi everyone, my name is Mira. I take she, her pronouns, and I'm a first year at Harvard studying neuroscience and English.
So all four of our guests on today's webcast have stories currently published in the Novelly library. Alyssa has Year of the Rat, Charlotte has Rippling Fire, Mira has River of Stars, and David has Athena. So my first question to all of you is, why do you write? Which is a little vague, but feel free to elaborate in whichever way you see fit. I think Charlotte, you're to start.
Sure. Okay. I want to give time for it.
sorry to call you out like that.
No, it's good. Like I knew before this, we were talking all the time and I want to give other people space too. So yeah, I have a very long response for this. So I would say that I write because I grew up escaping life by reading, and I can remember the moment I gasped at a phrase, laughed at a joke. Books defined my childhood, and I started writing because I wanted to give a future reader the joy and wonder that I feel when I read a really good story. My next reason is not very romantic, but I am a deeply pragmatic person. A lot of my friends actually tell me that for a poet, you're way too serious. I continue writing because I think I can make the most impact through it. The majority of media and publication opportunities I've had are related to my literary career, and I see this platform as a remarkable opportunity to talk about social issues that I care about that might not be otherwise talked about in the spaces I inhabit. I also believe that I'm skilled enough to teach others how to engage in literary activism through writing and to engage globally neglected communities through this. Being a successful writer doesn't just mean that you're good at writing, though I wish it was just that. It's also a mix of marketing, ambition, searching for opportunities. And I'd like to share this knowledge with people who often don't have the knowledge to easily construct a literary legacy, like people who are not upper middle class or American. I also write because I think it's a really clever and meaningful way to spread knowledge and understanding about the world. I think I care about cases like nuclear disarmament, climate change, and the education of Afghan women because I've heard the stories of those most affected by these issues. I think the best example I can give of this is nuclear disarmament. For many years, I only knew the death count of those who died as a result of the atomic bomb. And I took a class that theoretically argued that we need nuclear bombs to keep the peace. So all just statistics and theoretical ideas. I didn't know a lot about it, and nuclear weapons just felt like a very distant issue that I didn't have any part being in. Then I went to Hiroshima, where I spoke with hibakusha, survivors of the nuclear bomb. Hearing the heart-wrenching stories of hibakusha like Yoshiko Kajimoto and Koko Kondo felt like getting whiplashed. Their stories transformed what was once theory into something tangible and real. At Fukuromachi Elementary School, the direct recipients of the atomic bomb's violence left messages in chalk. Some were from parents asking about their missing children. Others were from dying teachers begging colleagues to take care of injured students. And others were the last will and testament of the dying. Those white chalk messages flashed in my mind when I gazed at the oily tracks of radioactive black rain in the Peace Memorial Museum. A few steps away, there was the shadow of a vaporized man. But it was the human moments that cut deepest. During lunch with hibakusha, a survivor, Sohori handed me handmade pencils that he carved from discarded cherry blossom trees. As a Hong Kongese American, so someone who comes from two rival heritages that are directly linked to what happened in World War II, receiving this gift from a Japanese hibakusha astonished me. After spending hours listening to academic policy talks, this moment felt profoundly human and transcended the barriers of language, culture, and politics. I began tailoring my skills to help with nuclear disarmament. I started writing poems based off of the testimony of Yoshiko Kajimoto and joined a webinar series where experts on nuclear nonproliferation discussed the intersection between that and the arms trade and community violence. I started writing an academic paper on the environmental and societal impact of nuclear weapons. And I think after college, I even want to work for a government office that focuses on weapons of mass destruction. None of this would have happened if not for going to Hiroshima and speaking with hibakusha. My life completely changed because of that experience. And I think that's a really good example of the remarkable power of story, of encapsulating human experience into language. Though I must admit, a poem or a story or a policy thing will never truly capture everything about life or experiences as insane as the nuclear bomb. I do think a story told well gives the reader a slice of that wonder. And I think that's enough to change lives.
I love how every time you speak, I can tell why you were chosen to be your state's poet laureate. every time. Yeah, so I think next up we have David. So good luck with that one, man. She put you in a tough spot.
Sure. Yeah, so I'm most definitely not as great of a speaker as Charlotte is, but I'll just kind of speak a little bit about why I write. I also didn't prepare a script or anything, so I'll just, I guess, stumble through this.
It's okay. You're fine. Don't worry about it.
Yeah. So basically, I'll give a little bit of background. So I come from a Chinese American family. My parents were immigrants to the United States. And about 23 or 24 years ago is when my parents came. And they started a Chinese restaurant in Duluth, Minnesota, which is my hometown. And it was one of those restaurants that is more like Chinese American rather than Chinese. So we serve things like General Tso chicken and like, you know, sweet and sour chicken and cream cheese wontons. And that was like the kind of stuff that we served. And that was the environment I grew up in. So basically every day after school, I would go to the restaurant. I would get out of school. I would get in my mom's car and she would, you know, hand me like a bowl of fruit and we would just drive to the restaurant. And, you know, I had my fair share of jobs. So, you know, I did like cashiering. I did like frying, like the stuff in the deep fryer, which was like really painful sometimes. I also waited tables and I bussed tables as well. I also like made wontons, though I was less good at that. So my parents didn't let me do that too often. What else? I also packed the orders in bags and like handed them to customers. And like on the rare occasion, my mom would like make me cook the fried rice because it was too busy or whatever. So like I had a lot of jobs at this restaurant. And the one thing that I was really known for at the restaurant was having this pencil behind my ear. Sometimes it was a pen, but it really helps because I'm running back and forth between basically the front desk and the cooking area, and doing all my jobs at the same time. So it's a lot of work, or it was too much hassle for me to like always go and, pick out a pen whenever I needed to take an order. So I just started the habit of like keeping it in my ear, like up here. And that's basically what a lot of the customers knew me by. Like they knew that I was the owner's son, but mostly they were like, oh, the boy with the number 2 pencil in his ear. And you'll see that in all the reviews if you go online. So yeah, that was kind of my life, basically, was me being at the restaurant. And really like every single day after the dinner rush, I would just take my pencil and I would go to this table in the very corner of the restaurant. We called it table number 1. My mom, it makes sense to my mom because she numbers it from the corner. It doesn't make as much sense to me, but I eventually learned the numbering system. But anyway, it was the table in the very far corner of the restaurant. And I would take our like menu cut-ups. Basically what we did was we cut out the menus that were already used so that we could take more orders on them and like reuse them. And I would just take those and I'd go to the corner and I'd write like little sentences or like things that just like maybe you could call word poetry or maybe not. And it often included lyrics from my favorite pop song or whatever I was like listening to at that moment. So that's the reason I really like started writing, was just because I wanted to have something to do. My parents were always like, oh, David, you should be doing homework, but I would always finish my homework like at school. So that was the reason I first started writing, because I was bored, which is not as, cool as Charlotte's reason is, but I think it's a very human reason. But after a little bit, I started, really falling in love with writing. I think writing gives me a chance to kind of explore what I'm feeling and ask questions. So I don't write a lot about anything that happens outside of my life. Instead, I just write about things that are going on in my life, kind of like a journal almost. So every poem or every personal essay that I've written basically is about my relationship to something in my life, whether it be, my parents, my sister, who is 19 years older than me, as a fun fact. So she's 37. And then, I think I just continued writing because it always made me feel better after I wrote. So yeah, that's why I write, to feel better, basically.
Honestly, it's a very real response. We can't all, I think it's a very therapeutic thing, and it has a lot of family connections, which also, I forgot to mention this at the start, but this is an all Asian American cast, with the exception of, Emdya, right? Are you Asian? Sorry, I'm also Asian. So we're like, got an extra half a point. Emdya is the odd one out, but she's rocking with us. It's your own fault for not being Asian, Emdya. But yes, this is an all Asian cast, and all Asian influenced stories by that measure. So I think it's really interesting how culture influences what we write and how our families. I think a lot of us are children of immigrants too, but that's a different thing. But Mira, why do you write?
I think in a nutshell, the reason why I write would be to remember. I guess I'm trying to think of how to give context for this. I also did not script this, in case you can't tell, but when I was young, I didn't live with my parents because they had just come to the US. They were trying to find jobs. They were trying to finish their studies in like 2 wildly different locations. So it just would not have made sense for me to try to like shuttle between 2 different states like every weekend. So I grew up with my grandparents in Beijing, and that city has so much history that I learned later on, but in the moment it was almost glossed over. Both in school and like by the Communist Party, they wanted to present a good front for it in a sense. So I guess learning what happened in that city after, with like the Tiananmen massacre and everything, it's just the idea that I see the city almost as two things, like the one I remember from my childhood and the one that I learned from hearing other people's stories. So when I grew up with my grandparents, they also would tell me stories every night. And it's something that I sort of miss now, being here in America and not being able to be with them. And that it almost feels like once they're gone, there's so much of history that they've seen, and there's so much to capture in there that's forgotten if it's not put down in writing. So I write to remember what happened to me in the past. I write also to remember the stories that other people tell me that I think need to be captured and shouldn't be forgotten, because otherwise you're erasing history. In a more, I guess, like romantic sense, as a kid, I was just an only child, so I spent a lot of time kind of just with my own thoughts, and like Charlotte, books were very much an escape for me. So it's the idea of creating that escape for other people, and both remembering the past through stories, but also to create new ones. And in cases where I don't really see stories that maybe my identity is so much represented in, or maybe I feel like there's stories that should be told that just I'm not really seeing in text at the moment, that's where writing comes in. And I think it's just powerful to be able to tell the stories that you want to see in the world.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. And I also think you guys are all like really spitting facts right now, really, really speaking your inner truth. Yeah, Alyssa, why do you write?
As corny as this may sound, I do believe that everyone has the capacity to be a writer. So in my freshman year of high school, the poet slash author Elizabeth Acevedo came to my school to talk and do some live reading. And I remember at the end, there was a Q&A of someone asking something along the lines of, can anybody be a writer? And she said that everybody can. Everybody has their own perspective, their own story, their own emotions to share with everyone else. And I really took that to heart. For me, I grew up in a Chinese family, so I grew up doing piano, violin, I did dance, I did swimming, I did theater, I did almost everything that you can think of. But ever since I learned how to write, I think I've always been drawn to it. So I've always had a particular fascination with the interplay of language and subtext and rhythm. And if you can't tell, I like writing poetry. But as I've grown older, I've begun realizing that I can do something bigger than just writing for myself. And now I aim to share my perspective with anybody who cares to listen. But I think that beyond my own perspective, I want to explore my own voice and how exactly I present myself to everyone else. And I'm excited to further my own skills and develop a richer library for myself.
And, you know, circulating back to what David said earlier, he mentioned how he utilizes writing like a journal and how it has relations to his life. And I know you said that your reason for writing isn't as close to Charlotte's, but I think writing in general and taking the action to show your writing and display it and show your perspective, as Alyssa was saying, is such a beautiful thing. And before I was getting ready for this webcast, I was reading back everyone's stories, and something that I saw is that even though writing can be seen as an escape from reality for some people, you guys all connected it to real world events and your experiences and your perspectives. And I think that originality is what makes your writing so beautiful. And on that note, I want to ask all of you, how do you think your identity informs your voice as a writer? David, would you like to start?
Sure. I guess this is like part two of my previous response, because for me, like, I don't really write a lot of, or actually I can start from the beginning. So I also used to read a lot. Actually, in like 6th grade, I had this English teacher who was named Mr. KJ, and he would give me basically like a book every single day or like every 2 days, because other than writing, the other stuff that I would do at the restaurant after the dinner rush would be reading. So I would basically be able to get through like a book within like a day or two. and he had this huge like classroom library. So he would just give me books day after day. So basically through all of middle school, I was reading a lot, but I mostly read fiction. And I actually did NaNoWriMo as an 8th grader because for our English class, where it was like a language arts class, in 8th grade, the teacher had a project called Genius Hour, and everyone basically got to pick like a passion project for them to work on. And I picked to do NaNoWriMo, so I wrote a novel, and then, you know, I edited it for the rest of the project. But I wrote my novel, it was a fiction novel, it was a dystopian fiction novel. And that was like the beginning of me like truly dedicating myself to writing, I would say. But then after coming into high school, I started realizing that like fiction wasn't exactly where I wanted my writing to be. And I had decided that I wanted my writing to be more personal to me and reflect more about what I was thinking rather than, you know, something that I was making up in my mind. And I think fiction writers are super cool and I enjoy reading fiction still, but I don't think it's something that interests me as much as writings about stuff that happens in my life. So in terms of how my identity informs like what I write as writer, basically everything. Basically everything I write at this point is about something that has happened to me, be it an experience or some identity that I want to come to terms with. And I think, again, it just really gives me a chance to explore my identity. In many situations, it might come out of like desperation to understand and to feel okay with identity. But I think that by writing, it helps me come to terms with that. So my identity basically is my writing.
I love the last thing you said, how writing helps you come to terms with your identity, because I think oftentimes we might try to, ignore our identity and try to become something that we're not, but it's difficult to ignore who you are as a person because it's going to show in most things you do. Also, I love how you just casually said, oh, we're doing a Genius Hour and I just wrote a novel because I have so many like rough drafts where I just never finish it. But thank you so much for your input. Mira, would you like to go next?
Yeah, so I think I kind of have almost the exact opposite situation of David, where I write mainly fiction. And it's always, I think, interesting to me to be able to inhabit minds of new characters that are different from me. And that's definitely where I work a lot when I do short stories. But right now I'm working on a longer project. I'm working on a novel. So I might be taking part in NaNoWriMo next month or November. Where the characters are Chinese, and a lot of the world is influenced by stories that my grandparents told me when I was young, like old Chinese legends. It's actually sort of an expansion on the story that I wrote for Novelly, where it's a retelling of sorts of the Chinese legend, the Cowherd and the Weaver. And parts of writing characters that feel very close to my own identity means that even when I'm not really consciously trying to insert parts of myself into the story, my identity informs who the characters become and what the world becomes. Because when I'm writing in a culture that I inhabit, it feels more authentic in a sense to just express what I grew up around or who I am. And I think there is also power in fiction in telling truths in a more palatable way, because people are less likely to, are more receptive to messages when it seems like they're embedded in fiction, they're embedded in entertainment. And that's, in a sense, why I write, and also how my identity comes forth in the writing, because I guess I feel most comfortable writing characters that feel like myself, and it feels very satisfying to be able to bring my own culture into what's a fictional fantasy world that involves like thieves and heists and fun stuff, but is also just very much me.
Thank you. Oh, you can go.
No, sorry, I was just gonna say, Mira, you're making our job so easy, because honestly, like part of what we try and do at Novelly is, and honestly, it's why representation ties so much into publicizing like minority youth voices, is because your voice is your culture, right? It is your identity. If you're from an immigrant household, if you're from like an Asian household, this is all going to show in what you write. And I think a lot of the times that's why when we see why minority authors and like books representing different cultures and different groups are so important, because the voice is the identity, and being yourself in your writing, it shows, even if you think it doesn't, even if you try really hard, a part of you and part of who you are is always going to come through. And all of you guys actually have your own way of getting that bit of your culture and of your identity and your voice through in different ways. Some of them a bit more obvious than others, like the Chinese myths in River of Stars. But yeah.
Yeah, and tying into what Maddie just said, it's just you guys may write different things. So for instance, David was saying how he garners towards nonfiction, while Mira writes more fiction and she shows her identity through the characters that she writes. It goes to show that in any type of writing, whether it's poetry or prose or whatever you decide to choose, you can implement your identity, and you might be doing so without even thinking about it. So also, Mira, your writing is beautiful. I just want to say that it really is beautiful. So, and Alyssa, would you like to go now?
Yeah, I think it's really hard for me to disentangle my own identity with the work I write, especially because I'm so drawn to writing about my own experiences. But for the poem I wrote for Novelly, Year of the Rat, it was the first draft I was going to do for a slam poetry competition I was going to do. And it was my first initial reaction to the way that people perceived it, the pandemic. I think I literally in the first week of all the schools shutting down back in 2020. And it was my reaction specifically to both happening back home with my own family in China. Also, my response to our then president at the time and his specific remarks about the pandemic. And more closely, I remember a girl in one of my classes specifically said in one of her own private conversations that Chinese people were disgusting. And that really stuck with me. And that was such an emotion that I felt at that moment that I needed to replicate through a piece of art. And I needed it to be not original, but I needed it to be presented at the start of something that could, blow up so much bigger. And as we can see, as Asian hate crimes have skyrocketed throughout the pandemic, I think more than ever we need to uplift these diverse voices. Especially, I bet everyone here can relate to the fact that we didn't have a lot of representation growing up in the media. In Harry Potter, my favorite character was Cho Chang. Even though she was a racist caricature, at least I could have something or someone who could even like resemble me in media. And I do make progress to uplifting more diverse voices. I think there's so much work to still be done. In one of my literary theory classes, we discussed Toni Morrison's lecture on Unspeakable Things Unspoken. And while this is like a very great lecture that can't be summarized in just a sentence, she basically criticizes what is considered the great works in the American canon, and how works of literature regarded as inferior, while white stories are regarded as what's typical or what is the American norm. And so again, as we've seen great progress, there's still so much to be done. What's happening back in Florida, my home state, of the book banning specifically, I took a look at the list, and basically almost all of the list is banning stories from people of color. And yeah, so a lot of progress to be made, but something that I'm personally working on is incorporating these themes of resistance into my work, because I think we need it more than ever.
Thank you so much, Alyssa. And also with the book bannings, I live in Florida, so I definitely see what you're talking about, especially I live in Miami. And, I see many perspectives. I see some people actually liking the book bannings and having that. And I applaud you for the work you're doing, because I read The Year of the Rat piece, and how it talked about the pandemic and the hate towards Asian Americans because of it. And the words you utilized were so impactful. So I think you're on the right pathway. And I definitely do believe that there is still work to be done in this area. Charlotte, would you like? Oh,
sorry, really quick. Year of the Rat is like a long running novelty favorite. I think Anna, our like CEO, our founder, she's Filipino American. She once emailed out Year of the Rat during the pandemic. I think it was after one of the shootings. She mass emailed Year of the Rat, and it was really, it hits hard every time I read it. It's beautiful. But again, all of your works are beautiful in their own ways. You know, hard hitting in different areas of my life. David, my Asian mother, I feel you. In Athena, yeah. Anyway, yes, MD. Yeah, Charlotte, go ahead.
Cool.
Sorry.
Just saying, I script everything for this because I got off a plane 2 days ago and my brain is still not functioning well. I slept 4 hours every day for a week. So yeah, that's why I sound great. I don't sound like that normally. I sound kind of crazy, which is why I have to script stuff. My identity gives me a different perspective and certain cadences and humor to my voice. I think the strongest example I can give on this is about the themes of a lot of my work. My writing focuses on social issues that I work on in real life. I've written poems about Hibakusha, survivors of the nuclear bomb, and women in Afghanistan, because I heard their stories in the face of war. Huang, the protagonist of my novelty short story, Rippling Fire, struggles with discrimination and perfectionism because I dealt with that growing up. I sometimes write to preserve history, a bit like Mira. My own family and some of my friends come from communities that are censored or ignored by mainstream media and history. My family history, for example, is largely unknown. I don't know anyone beyond my grandparents because my grandparents were sold as children to other families. It's a practice called Tongyangzi for my grandma. She was sold as a bride as a child. I think this lack of knowledge about the generations before me bothers me a lot, especially as someone who's very interested in history. And so I feel like an antidote to this loss is to record what little family history I do know. Some of my friends face severe political conflicts that have been censored or ignored by the media. I saw coverage of women in Afghanistan fade away in the months after the US left the country. The media might have left, but my friend was still there, unable to go to school. So I wrote a few poems about the topic. Then I started a poetry workshop series to offer women in Afghanistan a way to talk about their lives and to even publish their work. I find sometimes that if we don't offer these opportunities, that people just accept what happened to them as it's just happened, and they don't really fight it or try to change things. That happened in my own family's case. My grandparents were teachers and they were discriminated against during the Cultural Revolution, where they had to essentially stop teaching and they had to hide from the Red Guard constantly because their own co-workers were being murdered by those people. And I'll still encounter people from mainland China who will think that it didn't happen, or they'll tell me to my face that the Cultural Revolution wasn't that bad, you're lying. And it's like, I literally have history right in front of me. So I don't know what's up with you, but fine. My characters also all feel like extensions of various parts of who I am. I have some characters that lean on the side of serious and grim. Then I have others that are complete clowns and actually seem kind of insane. Every protagonist, villain, anti-hero has some root in me. It might be in their personality and how they talk or how they choose to present themselves, but they all are tied to me in some way. It's like acting. No matter what you read on a script, the actor imbues that character with something that is them. I also think that I sometimes write characters that I wish existed when I was younger. My children's book, Isabel and the Magic Bird, is an example of that. This book is about a little girl who wants to preserve a park, so she gathers her community to host a cleanup and convinces the owner of the park not to sell it to a factory. Growing up, I had a really hard time finding female role models in movies and books who would pursue their own interests rather than wait for a guy to do it for them. And even those who didn't wait for men, like Mulan and Beauty and the Beast, sacrificed themselves for family. I think that's really limiting, that the majority of female representation I saw growing up only did things for men or for family. I ended up playing war games and reading books that guys read because I just couldn't find that many diverse stories of women in the media that I was told growing up only girls should consume. Isabel is meant to be kind of a response to that childhood and to provide an alternate example of what women and girls can be that isn't limited to family or romance. I also think that identity changes how someone will describe things or what they'll focus on. I once read the story about an alien vlogger who ate brains, and I remember getting it workshopped in a class, and the students older than 30 could not understand what I was writing because most of the dialogue was the alien main character talking to anonymous accounts and in a chat room. Everyone who is a Gen Z person understood and even related to these accounts. They thought it added a lot of interesting context and encapsulated the loneliness of the alien. The older people thought it made no sense and made the story worse. I think that's a great example of how something very identity-based like age will affect how you tell a story. I also think that what we talk about and who we talk about is colored by the media we consume, who we've spoken with, and where we've gone. When I started writing, I wrote fantastical quasi-European settings because that was a lot of what I read growing up. After I read Red Rising, I almost exclusively wrote sci-fi for several years. I started reading poetry in 2021, and since then, the vast majority of my work has been poetry rather than prose. I didn't really think about social issues until I started meeting people affected by global conflicts. I am not who I am without writing. It defined my teenage years, and I think it's going to continue to define how I see my life and how I try to help people. Really not help people, but aid people in the collective liberation of their voices.
Man, so many good points. So I think one thing that I wrote down was how you advocate for this theme of resistance and having knowledge on historical events and how that influences your identity, and also teaching other people about these historical events. And I think pretty surprisingly is, even though we have media now and technology and all these resources, a lot of people tend to ignore historical events because they think it's unimportant. But man, if you talk to people that don't know basic things about like the Civil War or anything, any historical event for that matter, it's insane the information that they'll spit out. So I think it's wonderful that you were meeting these people and basically giving out this knowledge through your writing. And how you ended what you were just saying, how writing is basically part of you and you wouldn't be who you are without writing. I think that shows that even though our identities influence our writing, our writing is also part of our identity. And when you start to include that within your life, like when I started writing in sixth grade, and I'm not as experienced as any of you guys or as talented, but just writing, it's a coping mechanism. It's a wonderful way to see who you are on paper and to garner your thoughts on writing or whatever the case may be. And it's a medium that could be utilized for a variety of things, but regardless of whether we want it to or not, our identity will come forth. So I applaud all of you guys for embracing your identity as opposed to running away from it, even when we're in a culture that has so much Asian hate and discrimination because of whatever stupid policy or whatever the case may be. Thank you. So yeah, now we have some extra questions to ask you guys.
Yeah, so we have some extra time, which means, and I don't want to ask you guys to kind of pull more things to say out when I'm pretty sure you guys have said all that you wanted to say. So we're just gonna have a little fun question time. So do you guys have any really good writing tips or anything that was a really important lesson for you to learn? For when you so that you stopped like scrapping half written Google Docs and being like, oh God, I'm horrible. I don't have an order for this, so first come, first serve, I guess.
I mean, for me, what we're discussing in my creative writing class right now and what a lot of writers struggle with is this idea of perfectionism. Especially for me, like my first draft has to be the draft, or else I can't edit it. I can't look back on it. The first time I write it is the first time it's done. But I think there's such a different art and different perspective on revision itself as being part of your writing and as a tool to writing itself, that I think is underappreciated and I think needs to be explored more. But that perfectionism really gets in the way sometimes. But something that I've personally been doing to counter this is just free writing, just jotting down anything that comes to mind, even if it's not profound, even if it's boring or mundane. Still getting something out on that paper is still better than a blank one.
I definitely agree with that advice. I think it's really good, especially to know that you really shouldn't be thinking about writing what the next great American novel or become the next Walt Whitman. I had a teacher, Mr. Schaefer, once. He's actually the teacher that got me into creative writing in 8th grade. He told us the best advice he ever got was butt in chair, because what you need to do is just sit down and write. It doesn't matter if it's good, it doesn't matter if it's bad, just keep writing, because there are going to be so many days where you are writing like the worst thing you've ever read, and that's okay. Like, as long as you just keep up the habit of just translating what your thoughts are into verse or into story or whatever, that's the only thing that matters. Because anyone who is really good at something, they had to fail a bunch first. And I think another good piece of advice is, if you're doing something really big, like you're creating a book, a chapbook, something like that, try to create a support network around you. When I was creating my own major projects, I made sure to create a whole support team of mentors and friends who would support me, who would read my work. Like, I was writing a book one time and I didn't want to do it. It took me way too long to figure out that what I needed to do personally is to tell like 20 different strangers around the world I'm writing it. And then they'll start bothering me, because then they'll be like, when's your next chapter coming out? What are you doing? Can you let me know what's happening? And then you really can't, like, you can't basically avoid it. Essentially, you can't deny that this is happening, because now all of these people are knocking on your door or DMing you and asking you, when is the next thing coming out? So I think having a support group for any project you have will really help you with these sorts of things, because writing is such a lonely experience as is.
In a really fun way, that is also kind of what NaNoWriMo will bully you into writing every single day of November, whether you like it or not. But that's also why it's a really good productive exercise. And there is support in that. I mean, if any of the NaNoWriMo youth, I'm sure, can vouch for this. I did NaNoWriMo. I wrote a book. It was a really bad book. I don't want to talk about it. But it really is more helpful in its own form of support, in the way where they have stuff like this, where you can hear people talk about writing and realize it's not the most horrifying thing to hit the 1,000 word count over and over and over again. David, Mira, do you have any writing tips?
Yeah, I think Alyssa is very right about perfectionism being such a big thing, because it is for me too. I can't remember who said this, but like, I keep on hearing the phrase like, write drunk, edit sober, and I'm not endorsing everyone to go out and get vodka shots, but I think with the first draft, what really helps me just get words on a page is giving myself permission to absolutely suck. Like, I show my first drafts to nobody. I know it's a thing just for me, and it's just to get ideas down on the page, because I found it's always so much easier to edit stuff once you actually have a page of stuff to work with, rather than sitting there and trying to make everything that comes out of you be absolutely perfect. And honestly, when I'm stuck with an idea, I think what helps is to just get away from the writing. And I know, I guess, NaNoWriMo, you're working on sort of a deadline of like trying to deliver a certain amount each day to meet the goal at the end of the month, but just stepping away, taking a walk. Sometimes I'll like play music or go and dance. And I think expressing yourself in some other way than just words helps you kind of free up the block in your mind and almost like tap into an artistic part of yourself. I don't think that's exactly how it works, but it's just getting away. I think also when writer's block, reading just helps a lot, because you see other people's words and you kind of remember, because I'm pretty sure a lot of people who like writing usually started by loving reading, and it's just a reminder, like, this is sort of the like ultimate end product you're working towards, and just a reminder why you like to do it in the first place.
I would like to say that I also think on a weird level, NaNoWriMo is great because you can't step away from it. So you can't think about what you're doing. So you can't be a perfectionist because you're like, if I'm a perfectionist, then I won't reach the word count for today. I need to reach the word count. But it does kind of kill a piece of you. Again, my book was not good, but other people in my class who were better than me were still, it's hard to write without editing yourself as you go. It's hard to not want to delete every single word because it sounds stupid. Because a lot of the times when you're writing something for the first time, you feel like an idiot. And then you read it back and you go, oh, damn, I'm awesome. That was incredible. Granted, there is a little walk between those times. That's like a break, a day, a week. But I also do think that it's an important part of the creative process to know when to keep going and know when to take a break and step back from the mind tunnel, the sand pit. David, what's your writing tip?
So I guess, I mean, I agree with basically what everyone has said. And I guess mine's pretty similar as well, but I've basically done a thing that Terrence Hay did for his collection. I think it was like American Sonnets for My Future Assassin. But for that collection, he basically wrote a sonnet every single day in the year after Trump's election. So he basically just like forced himself to write a sonnet every single day. And then he ended up going back and revising it and then putting it into the collection of books. So I ended up starting to do that like last spring. I was less ambitious than Terrence Hayes, so I ended up setting my limit to like a poem every 2 days. But for the entire summer and last spring, I basically wrote a poem every 2 days. Sometimes if I was like extremely inspired, I write one every single day. And I think almost 90% of those ended up being deleted. However, I still have 10%, and 10% of like 90 is like 9. So I still have 9 poems that I'm like pretty okay with that were from the summer. So, I mean, this is basically what everyone else was saying, but just do it, I guess, which does not sound helpful, but yes, doing it will help.
There's this quote I like, and it's like, the only way to learn is by doing, the only way to do is by learning, and the only way to start is start. I think that's kind of basically the summarization of the writing tips. Like sometimes the only way to learn how to write is to write the worst poems and the worst short stories. And David, I'm sure your dystopian fiction novel wasn't peak literature, but I'm sure you got something out of it. I'm sure the last chapter was better than the first. Also, I have been thinking, I'm like, did he make a rip-off Hunger Games or a rip-off Divergent for his dystopian novel? Very of the era. But yeah, I think now we are gonna do closing thoughts. We only have about 10 minutes left. So what are our closing thoughts? Do we have any things we want to leave the audience with, you, our panelists? Or I think that was a pretty good note to end on, if we just want to move forward. Show of hands.
I think if I can just say something real quick, that I think everyone in this audience and everyone in this world has a story that they are suited to tell and that they are meant to tell. And I know the writing process can get really rough sometimes with writer's block and just trying to make things good. But I think it's good to remember that, you know, you have a story inside you and it's something beautiful that you should share with the world. And however long it takes to get there is however long it takes. But you got this, and you're all going to create wonderful things.
That's a very sweet note. I think we're all okay with ending on that. And before we say goodbye, hopefully Alyssa comes back. Are we done? Okay.
We're not quite done yet, but
sorry,
yeah, no worries.
Your face came back on really quick. We want to do a last moment where everybody gets to talk about what they're working on, because I know some of you have projects, some of you have books coming out, some of you have your own really cool things. They're always really cool. You guys are all awesome. So if anybody wants to promote what they're doing or what they're up to, where we can find more of your work. Charlotte's trying to unmute.
No, I was looking for a website, but I'll take it, sure. I guess right now I'm focusing more on policy stuff. So the next thing I'd write is probably an academic paper, low key. But I guess for creative writing, I'm technically competing for the National Youth Poet Laureate title. So I don't know if you're in Hawaii in May. Let me know. We can meet up. I'm there for a week after. So if you're in Maui, we can go travel. You know, I'm going to Volcano. Come with.
Yeah. If anybody's super into poetry competitions, the National Youth Poet Laureate, creme de la creme.
Yes,
root for Indiana. It doesn't matter what state you're from. You're rooting for Indiana. We said so.
Yes, all of the poets out there, even here right now, the panels, guys, apply. It's amazing. You really should try. Even if you don't think you'll get in, do it. I applied a month after I started poetry. It worked out. Okay, like just do it. Just try it. I guess also random advice moment. Oh my God, my brain is not working right now. I think also another thing is just to don't take yourself so seriously as a writer. Like just chill out and just think of it as like, I don't know, I'm approaching this. It's a new thing. It's cool. Let's just keep writing, even if it's bad. I find some of my worst work is for whatever reason, the most popular work. And I am deeply offended by that. But for whatever reason, that's what everyone else thinks. I don't know why. And then my favorite work is usually the one everyone hates. So that's just my opinion. Yeah, and if you guys ever want to see any new publications, you can find me on the website that I just linked, or also at my Instagram at cmyoung. I mostly travel, so that's most of what I post, but sometimes I'll post some fun literary thing or some random poet meme. So if you guys relate, follow me. Yeah, it's good seeing you guys. And if any of you are interested in writing, you can honestly message me. I'm up for talking about writing at any time. I go to university where no one writes, so I'm desperate to meet writers. But yeah, good seeing you guys.
Mira, do you have anything you want to promote? Any fun stuff, or is Harvard slowly draining? Is the academically rigorous school being too academically rigorous right now?
That is such a real statement because I'm in midterm season and have the audacity to be surprised my academically rigorous school turns out to be academically rigorous. But
what you get for getting into Harvard, bro. That's karma.
No, but I am working on, I kind of mentioned earlier, basically I had a first draft, talked with my professor last semester, realized I hated how that draft ended. So I'm currently rewriting that retelling of the Cowherd and the Weaver legend, but instead of it being River of Stars, where it was like sort of still in an ancient Chinese setting, I made it more sci-fi and turned the Cowherd and the Weaver basically into rival thieves. So enemies to lovers arc, and it's clear, and I am just trying to find time to work on it where I can, but hopefully I will be having a draft done by this end of the summer and eventually maybe to publication.
Oh my God, that's so awesome. We're also excited. If anybody wants to keep up with it, try and write down Mira's name and find her socials. I'm sure she'll post when the book's out or in drafting. David, do you have something going on?
I do have an opportunity that I guess I can share. So I am the editor-in-chief of an international magazine called Asterlit. So our submissions are open right now, and we award, we're paying publication for the best prose and poetry piece submitted. You'll get paid $100 if you're either the best prose or poetry piece, and you'll earn publication opportunities even if you're not. So we offer different awards and publication. So subs are open if you want to submit to anyone who's watching, I guess. And it's
Can you say, sorry, can you say what it's called again?
Yeah, it's called Asterlit, Aster like the flower. And it's open to everyone 13 to 25.
actually like really something you can promote. That's actually great timing because we're being watched by a bunch of writers. So hopefully you get a lot of submissions and two of you hopefully win $100 each. Alyssa, do you have anything you want to promote?
Right now, I'm honestly just honing my own creative writing skills. I'm also a public health major on the pre-law track, so doing a lot of academic writing as well. But yeah, focusing on honing my skills for now. Right now, I have an idea for a short story about a Chinese woman and her experience at her first American Thanksgiving, which I think is really interesting. I'm also dabbling into creative nonfiction essays, which I think is really cool. I think it's a really interesting genre to experiment with, especially. So looking forward to working on that. You can find me on Instagram at Alice, ALIS Xiao, XIAO, to talk about anything regarding writing or otherwise.
Yeah, you guys have such good timing for when we should end stuff. Oh my God. It's like instinctual. You guys all have really good internal clocks. So I think that was about it. But if you are interested in reading any of our panelist stories, they're all available for free. That is right, free, $0. They've all thankfully given them to us, Novelly. All you need to do is, I think you need an account, but that's it. And I promise you, we don't email you, we don't bother you. We're not stealing anything from you. So if you want to read Year of the Rat by Alyssa, it's an amazing poem. I'm sure Alyssa hates it. Alyssa hates that we've talked about it at Novelly 3 times. I'm sure she wishes it was a different piece of her work, but it's really good. And hopefully she adapts to us talking about it constantly. Charlotte is a fantasy, like sci-fi ice skater thing, which it sounds, that's the best way I can explain it. It's really good. It's called Rippling Fire. It's a few chapters, but it's really good. David's is a series of poems or one really long poem, depending on how you look at it. But it's a series of poems. It's called Athena. It's also really good. And Mira's is River of Stars, which, as she said, it's also a fiction story. And as she said, it's a retelling of, what is it? It's a retelling of a old Chinese myth, the cowherd and the weaver. All of these stories are available. We also have a ton more like them if you're interested, some nonfiction, some more poetry from different perspectives. Today was all Asian American. We have Mexican American, we have Black stories, we have LGBT stories, and they're all written by youth. I know, Charlotte, it's awesome, isn't it? So if any of you guys are interested, Novelly is a great platform. If any of you guys are interested in submitting your writing, Novelly is a great platform. We're always looking for more writers. We have a program where you get a mentor and you get to work on developing an idea for a Novelly story. And all of our mentors are really good writers. It's a really good opportunity. I think applications are still open for that, but I could be wrong. If they're not, you might have to wait a few months. But Emdya, do you have anything you want to say? Because I think I'm remembering all of it, but I think I'm not.
I think you've said all of it. So
yeah, but I think that's all the time we have. So go out there, write, be fired up about social issues, stop those books from getting banned, protect trans youth, be a nuisance to all of the worst people in the world constantly. And have a good one, you guys. Thank you so much for watching.
Awesome. Thank you so much for leading that great panel. It was so wonderful to have you guys. And I'm going to move forward with that as my motto for the rest of the week. Be a nuisance to the worst people. Awesome. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you later. We have another one of these webcasts scheduled too for next month. So if you enjoyed this, if you want to learn more about Novelly, if you want to hear more from other awesome young authors, you can subscribe to our channel And you'll see that in our upcoming live streams. And yeah, I hope to see you next month during Camp NaNoWriMo as well. So thanks, everybody.